And welcome everyone. There we go. Yes, thank you for joining today. So I am Justin Cook. I'm the planner two here with the Regional District of East Kootenay and the lead on the Fairmont Hot Springs Hazard Guidance Project, for which we are undertaking the community consultation today. As a first piece, beyond welcoming you, I'd like to just give a brief land acknowledgement. And the regional district is committed to working with Indigenous governments in the region to continue to build strong, respectful relationships through sharing, learning, and understanding. The RDEK's regional boundaries are within the homelands of our First Nations, including the Akiskanook First Nation and Shuswap Band. We work, live, and learn on these unceded ancestral lands and are grateful to the many Indigenous elders, knowledge holders, leaders, and educators who have been guardians of these lands for time immemorial. As we meet today to discuss future land use, we are deeply grateful for the participation and engagement of our First Nation neighbors who are joining us in this meeting. So with that, I would like to just briefly introduce our project team. Today we have Brett Eaton and Jack Park from BGC and Tamsin Mills from Pina Sustainability, who are leading the project and really digging into the policy future and report writing for this hazard guidance project. And joined with us online is also Susan Klovchuk, our area director. And I will turn it over to her now to give a brief introduction as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Justin, and thank you to everyone here on the panel for working with the RDK on this particular project. And I really want to just make a particular thanks to those of you joining us online to be engaged in what's happening on this particular project in the Fairmont Hot Springs Hazard Guidance. The information that is gathered today is going to inform policies and the future development of the area. So it's really important to have the level of engagement we have. I also just want to do a special shout out to my colleague, Director Roberta Schneider from Area G. Thank you, Director Schneider, for joining us and expanding your knowledge and keeping engaged in the entire regional district. So I appreciate that. I also want to acknowledge that we're also being joined by MLA-elect Scott McInnes and thank Scott for joining us and learning more about your new area of responsibility and offer you our congratulations on your election. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the team because you are not here to listen to me. So away you go.
Thank you so much, Director Klopchak. Yeah, so if we could move on to the next slide here, please. Thank you. So we are here to talk about the Fairmont area and the flood control service area, along with the Cold Spring Creek and Fairmont Creek watersheds that do pose a risk to this area. So we have, as many of you know, undertaken quite a lot of work up here already, including some hazard mapping and the flood mitigation structure that is currently under construction. Now, with that being said, I do want to let folks know right off the get-go here that we are here today to talk about land use. So what will be occurring within this area, or what the permissions moving forward might look like, what the requirements might look like, and not talking about the structure itself or the other adjacent projects that are going on alongside this, this project will be reliant on a lot of that work, but it builds upon that. And so I just want to make sure that there is that distinction understood amongst everyone joining us on the call today. But yes, as I said, the Fairmont Flood Control Service Area is an established service area that is looking at the hazards of the Fairmont Creek and Cold Spring Creeks. We have a couple of maps up here that on the left-hand side, we see that flood control service area, which is established for for paying for any of the hazard mitigation pieces that do result as a part of the overall work that's going forward here. And then on the right side, we see the full extent of the watersheds in which we're talking about. So the map on the left is about half of the area of the map on the right. And I just wanted to include these, and we just wanted to include these so that there's that context of the scope and scale of the potential hazard risk areas and what we're speaking about. But really, when it comes down to it, when we're talking about land use planning, it really does focus on that area to the left, where we do have the development community that currently exists, and there is future development potential. And so figuring out how and where and what we can build on these lands in the future and what we need to have in place for any individual application that may come forward. Um, and next slide, please. Double checking. So a little bit of timeline for this project. We're currently in the community engagement portion. So Pina and BGC have been doing some work in the background to prepare out for this session here today, but also in looking at other policies that exist throughout the province. And throughout this process, we'll be taking the feedback that we do here today, alongside with some other community meetings that we will be having alongside of this meeting today. And the BGC and PINA team will be coming back with policy recommendations in the form of a report that we will be using to then inform policies that we will be bringing forward to the board for their consideration. So as I said, right now we're in the community engagement phase, which we're looking at running until the end of November. So just the month coming up at the end of this week. And then we'll be looking at doing that report development through the last couple months of 2024 and into the first month of 2025 as we take a review of the initial draft and make any modifications as needed. Following that, to have any policy that has effect within the regional district, that does need to go through the board and to have those policies actually ratified into our policy book as it is at the regional district. What those look like exactly, we're not sure yet. And that's sort of what we're doing this exercise for, is to determine options for how best to control development in the area moving forward. Next slide, please. So just to speak to the agenda, what to expect out of this meeting today. Currently, we're doing an introduction to the meeting, and then that will be followed by a look at debris flows and debris floods. What are they? What do they look like? And then following that, a look at the Fairmont Hot Springs area and the Steep Creek history. So what events have happened there? What are the risks that exist specific to the Fairmont Creek area? And really just trying to develop that understanding of what and how that risk exists within that area. And then there'll be a discussion on risk tolerance. So this is an area where we're really looking at how much risk is the community willing to accept, or what are those realms of risk. And then finally, looking at the policy considerations. So what policies might be possible, and at each phase, we'll be looking for input back from all of the attendees online today. There'll be questions posed to you, and we'll be asking you to get on your keyboards and type some responses, and ultimately we'll be using those responses to feed into this process. And then finally, there will be an opportunity for question and answer at the end of the session, where for detailed questions, we can provide those direct responses with our subject matter experts online today. There's also the webinar chat function that you'll have access to throughout the session today, and be able to put in any questions that may come up or hit your mind as we're going through the presentation. And in some instances, we may be able to answer those as they come up, or in others, we may save those for the question and answer period, sort of depending on the scope and what's being asked in that chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brett here to start off into the meat and potatoes of the presentation today. And you're on mute, Brett, sorry.
I always do that. I've done it 100 times and I never get it right. Thanks very much, Justin. Before I dive in, I'll just give you a very quick intro about where I'm coming from. So I've been working on how watersheds work, how landslides transform into debris flows and move down through a watershed since about 1993. I've done that as a research professor at the University of British Columbia, as a consultant working in the interior, and now more recently as a consultant working globally for BTC. So this is something that's really close to my heart, and I spent most of my life dealing with this kind of stuff. And so I know a lot of people in the Fairmont area have heard from people like Matthias Jakob, who's was a good friend of mine, and talked at various open meetings about what debris flows are and what debris floods are and that sort of thing. But we're just going to sort of review some of that and then try to set ourselves up to understand what the chance of those things happening is and how that changes. Because the real problem here is these events happen and they surprise us. Yesterday, I was actually in the field on the North Shore, and there'd been a stream that I actually grew up by, and nothing ever happened in it in the 30 years that I was there. I never saw any change. And yesterday morning, I saw it filled with 3 meters of sediment to the point where the stream is now running through somebody's house and then down a road and into a shopping area. And if you'd asked me at most points in my life whether I thought that could happen, I would have said, no, there's just no way. And that's the problem that humans face when we use our common sense to sort of understand these watersheds. Common sense doesn't get us very far with low frequency, high magnitude events. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Jack. Let's keep it simple. If you've got steep terrain, it's all going down towards the ocean. It's all moving down to the valley. If we looked forward in 5-6 million years, all of the mountaintops will have been broken off, crumbled down, and moved down into the valleys. The only reason we still have mountains is because the way the tectonic plates work, they're always lifting it up. So steep terrain is changing terrain. When does it change? Mostly when it rains. That's not true everywhere, but in most of North America, it's input due to rain events and sometimes snow events that causes landslides. When you get a landslide driven by rain, by water, it often will liquefy and then start to flow downstream at a rate that becomes uncomfortably quick. But the key thing to realize is that if you have a mountain and if you have a valley, that landscape over millions of years timescale is a living, breathing landscape where sediment is being transferred from the top down to the bottom, and we're just in the way. So that big picture is what we need to sort of keep at the top of our minds. We've got some terminology that we use for that. We can call these hazards hydrogeomorphic hazards. Now, hydrogeomorphic is basically just jargon to mean hydro, driven by water. Geomorphic is the term that we use to describe the study of how landscapes evolve and change, right? So that's where we're coming at this from. Our landscapes are living, they're changing, and the time that they change is when we have major inputs of precipitation in a place like British Columbia. Okay, where does the debris come from? Well, you wouldn't get any change if rock just stayed rock, right? It wouldn't evolve. But you've all seen that rock breaks up. You've seen your driveways break up during winter events when you get frost that then gets in the cracks and expands and breaks up your concrete pad or whatnot, loosens the bricks in a brick pathway. That's happening on the mountaintops too. So it generates debris that then falls off steep cliffs and it accumulates in gully systems. And those gully systems are the conveyors for these things that we can call hydrogeomorphic hazards. But what does that mean? It means floods, debris floods, and debris flows. And each one of those, as we'll talk about, is a slightly different kind of mechanism. So I think that's probably a good time to go to the next slide. If you live in Ontario, there's not many mountains, there's a lot of water, but you basically get floods, right? And what causes the most of the damage in lower elevation areas without the beautiful mountains that we've got to live with and in, is you get water damage. Water gets in. Doesn't play nicely with electricity. Doesn't play nicely with foundations and drywall and carpet. And it's also a hazard. You can get swept away and drown in it. So flood hazards are something that I think we're familiar with, where we're just talking about water. That's not the thing that we're mostly worried about in British Columbia. It does happen for sure, and I'm sure you've all experienced some level, seen flooding in your lifetime from the big rivers that are in the main valleys in British Columbia. But there's something else that happens when you've got mountains, when you've got debris, when you've got the ability to transport sediment at fairly appreciable volumes. And that's what I was talking about with my little anecdote about the house that I visited yesterday morning. What happens, so let's think of a small mountain stream. What typically happens in a small mountain stream is that not much moves, even during a relatively big rainstorm. You might see some sand and cobble and boulder, and maybe you can hear cobbles and things like that rolling through a culvert, but it looks pretty much like it did after the flood as it did before. That we would call a flood, right? It's not a huge hazard. You might get some accumulation in ditches, and maybe if your ditch is not very well designed, you might get some erosion of it. But floods in mountain environments aren't the really big thing that we're worried about. What also happens in these streams is once you get to a level that is strong enough to pick up all of the material that's on the channel bed, all of a sudden you go from 0 to 60. You go from very little transport, just the stuff, the sand and whatnot that falls into the stream channel, to mobilizing and transporting all of the sediment that's actually in the stream channel. So there's this shift, and that usually happens at something like a 50-year to 100-year return period event. And that's what I saw yesterday morning. Is they had a debris flood, and I'm in my mid-50s, and I've seen it once on that creek. And yeah, yesterday, I guess October 18th was the day that it happened in my lifetime. And it may happen in the future, may happen next year, but it will occur about twice in a century. Usually, that's about the right ratio. But it's mostly transporting the same kind of stuff as you have in a stream channel. So sand, cobbles, and gravels, right? So it looks like the stuff that you see in river channels. That's a debris flood. They're nasty. They do cause lots of channel change. They cause bank erosion. They can cause channel damage, but they're much less likely to actually cause loss of life. That's not true when we cross the next process boundary, okay? There are some streams, like Cold Spring Creek, like Fairmont Creek, that can experience floods. They can experience debris floods, but then they're also steep enough that they can produce things called debris flows. And I know you've heard about these sorts of things, and there's been a recent history of it. Jack's going to talk about that a little bit later. I'm just keeping an eye on the time here to make sure I don't talk too much. But what happens with a debris flow is typically we have a landslide or an avalanche, something that happens way up top in the top end of a watershed. It comes down, usually during a big rainstorm when everything else is wet too, and it hits the stream channel itself. As it does that, it shocks the whole system so that stream channel that used to be just saturated water with water flowing over top of it, like a stream, it shocks it, and generates this slurry of sediment, kind of like a concrete. So now we liquefy the whole stream channel, including all of the trees, and that starts to move downstream. And it's moving downstream fast. It's moving downstream for a small debris flow, maybe about as fast as someone like me, who's an average to slow runner, can run. And a big one, it's moving faster than any of the fastest sprinters in the Olympics. So, not possible to escape from. As it moves down, it grows by shocking and liquefying all of the sediment in the stream channel downstream of that. And then it moves all the way down to a fan at which it transitions from eroding and transporting to depositing. And that's what we see in this picture over on the far right. You see that little initiation point, that sort of top end of the brown polygon. That's the landslide. Moves down, hits the stream channel. As it goes through the stream channel, it grows. Then it reaches our fan, and it starts to deposit all of that material in and around the infrastructure there, the houses, and the fan itself. So we've got floods, debris floods, and debris flows, and the boundary between each of those is a fairly definite thing. The boundary between floods and debris flows, basically the size of the rain event, how much water. So it's driven mostly by precipitation. The boundary between debris flood and debris flow, that's that other trigger of when does a landslide actually occur? Does it liquefy? There's a lot more chance, there's a lot more probability that goes into forming a debris flow. Okay, so I think we've got the basic concepts here. Let's look at the next slide, please. One of the things that we need to understand is that because of the dynamics that I've been describing, the size of these events can actually grow, right? So a flood coming into a reach and going out of reach, it's going to stay the same size. So it's the volume C, it doesn't change very much because it's not picking up appreciable volumes of sediment. That's a little less true when you get to a debris flood, where now you're adding sediment to the water that what we call bulks the flow, makes it bigger, and you can get something like 20% more material in your flow. So you actually get a slightly larger event. Debris flows, even if they don't grow as they move and migrate, can grow by a matter of about 60%, become 60% bigger. But by the time they've done all of that eroding, it's quite often the case that the size of the debris flow will be maybe 50 times to 100 times larger than just the clear water flow that triggered it. So that is why the hazard and the nature of these hazards changes quite a bit. Floods are bad. Debris floods are even worse because they're more destructive and they can grow. And debris flows are at another end of the spectrum where their volume is much, much greater than the size of the floods that we have to deal with. Okay, next slide. So this basically talks about that anatomy of a debris flow and a debris flood. The debris flow is something that starts way up in the headwaters, moves down as it grows, and reaches what we call the fan apex, where it starts to deposit. So now this diagram should look a little bit to you like the Cold Spring Creek fan. And what we're seeing is we have a transition from an area where it's primarily bedrock controlled to one that is now a fan, and deposits of sediment are what created that fan. That's usually where a lot of our infrastructure ends up being. Some parts of that fan will be elevated above the active one. We call those paleo fans. But some areas will be active and right in, in the area where debris flows are likely to move, transport boulders, and deposit large loads of sediment. The other key point here is that as sedimentation occurs on a fan during a debris flow, quite often the channel will be blocked, and that causes the debris flow to shoot off in another direction. So it's not just deposition in the current channel location, it can be deposition anywhere in what's called the active fan. Okay, next slide, please. Enough talking, what do they look like? So this is a video that gets us up close and personal with a debris flow. You can see there are people stepping over a debris flow right at this moment. This is the front end of it. And they weren't really aware of what they were dealing with. The video sound, I've heard the sound, and the sound is the most impressive thing here. But you can look at the water. The water is full of sediment. It's not pure water. It's full of silt and clay and mud, which is one of the first signals. And now they actually hear something, and things get a little crazy. They've had the ability, in this case, there it comes. That's what the debris flow looks like. That doesn't look like a stream flow to me at all. Those are boulders floating in that material, and that is a flow that is maybe 3 meters deep, maybe 2.5 meters deep. That's a small debris flow. It's moving at a rate that is low in comparison to a large one. And in this case, you can tell that the people were lucky enough to actually escape from this debris flow. They managed to avoid exposure to it. But that's only because they had warning and because it was small. A bigger event would have covered a lot much larger area and been impossible to escape from. Let's go to the next video, please. This is just another example of what it looks like when these things come down into, this is a time lapse sort of sped up. So they come down in multiple fronts and multiple waves. And that's a key dynamic that we need to sort of keep in mind as we think about it. It's not even just one event. And you can see that the net effect of this can be very deep deposition of sediment on that fan material. So now it's time to turn to some questions where we ask you about your experience. So we're going to launch a poll here about hazards, and we'll give you, moderator, how many minutes will we allocate to this one?
We were doing 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll be able to see just how many, kind of what the percentage of participation is. So if we get close, we'll give people a 1-minute warning here, but you've got about 3 minutes. Perfect.
So we'll come back online once this, in 3 or 4 minutes, or when this question's been fully or reasonably fully answered.
And for people on the screen, you should be able to see it pop up there on a pop-up window, and provide your answers on the screen there. So we have about 30 seconds left. We've got 11 out of 20 have already answered questions here. So I'll just maybe give it a little bit more just to give the last percentage of people an opportunity to get their questions in. So probably maybe 45 seconds longer here. And maybe while people are still answering, just to let people know how the data is collected here. The long text answers can't be shared just because those go into an Excel spreadsheet at the end. But any of the questions that come up that have like a yes, no answer, we are able to share the results of that on the screen. So we will, I think there's 1 or 2 questions that have that type of answer, and we will share those results immediately with you. So the data collected today will help inform the people that are running the project. But just so you know, we'll only be able to share the different type of question versus the long text answers that we're seeing here. So another 30 to 40 seconds here, and we'll wrap this one up. And if you are still typing, we'll just give another 10 seconds or so here. It looks like things have kind of stalled for those that are going to answer this question. So another 10 seconds and we will end the poll. And
All right.
that is it. We'll turn it back to you.
Perfect. So that's our first question about the experience. Now we'd like to ask you, what are your concerns concerns you most about future events? So we're going to have another short Zoom poll here as well. So another 3 or 4 minutes. Okay. Be back soon.
And we still have some people answering, so we'll just give another 30 seconds or so. For those of you that may want a little more time, just a reminder that we will have the same questions posted later this evening on the Engage page. So if you do want to take some more time to provide the answers to these questions, you are welcome to do that after this on the Engage page this evening. We'll also have a recording of this meeting posted as well once it has been exported. So those are all options for you should you wish to hold off on your answers so that you can provide a more thorough or fulsome response, or if you have something else that you do want to add. Looks like we still have a few people answering here, so we'll just give another 15 seconds or so before we wrap this poll up. And we'll turn things back to Brett.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much for your feedback on that. We look forward to having a look at it. We're going to change presenters now. Jack, you want to advance to your next slide and yeah, introduce yourself.
Amazing. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, thank you, Brett. And hi, everyone. My name is Jack Park, and I'm a geological engineer with BGC Engineering. Today, I'm calling in from Calgary, Alberta, and just want to thank everyone for joining this engagement session. Brett did an excellent job speaking to what debris flows and debris floods are, but what do we know about those processes at Fairmont Hot Springs? I do want to acknowledge that many of the folks tuned into today's call may already know about some of the major events that have occurred, but I'd like to include some additional details since the last public engagement meeting on hazard study in 2021. So we know that these steep creek processes can occur over tens of thousands of years. However, these hazards aren't really a concern until there are elements at risk, such as humans, infrastructure, and the effects of climate change that humans contribute to that make these impacts worse. Knowing that these events span over many, many years, I wanted to highlight some of the major events that have occurred only in the last decade or so at Fairmont Hot Springs. So along the top, we have the dates of significant events, and for each of the creeks, the recorded volumes of material that have come down each of those creeks. And to put these volumes in context, an Olympic-sized swimming pool can contain approximately 2,500 cubic meters of water. Some of the larger events occurred in 2012 and 2020 on both of the creeks, which were included in the Cold Spring Creek Hazard and Risk Study in 2021. However, since then, those smaller in volume, we did observe some more events on both creeks between 2021 and 2023. And one thing to note here is that the event volumes that we're sharing here today may change as additional information is gathered through ongoing studies. Now, I'd like to share some photos from some of the events from the last decade or so. So this image is from the June 20th, 2013 event. It's showing the lower sedimentation basin at the Glen Eagle Drive, and this photo is looking north. And as you can see, you have the inundated. Was there a question there? Oh, okay. So yeah, as you can see, that the sedimentation basin is full of both water and debris that have come down, and noting that this wasn't the largest recorded event in the last decade. And then this photo is from the August 12th, 2019 event. And what you're seeing is the Cold Spring Creek Reservoir that was filled just shortly after the debris flood event. And note that the capacity of this reservoir is approximately 900 to 1,600 cubic meters for water, meaning that it may hold larger volumes of debris as the material is able to pile on top. Then less than a year after, on May 31st of 2020, we had another debris flood event that filled the same Cold Spring Creek reservoir. And in this photo, note that the debris also overtopped to the right side of the structure, as you can see, which is shielding the spillway that exists there from this view. This was a larger event than the one from 2019 for Cold Spring Creek. But also, Fairmont Creek received more significant volume on the same day. This is the same 2020 event, just downstream of the reservoir and Highway 95 at Fairview Drive. And typically, a culvert should be visible on the left side of this photo where you're seeing the pooling, but that culvert was plugged and by the debris that had come down, overtopping the road, as you can see in the photo. So I've shared the recorded events of the past decade or so and some images from those events. But what does that mean, and how are we caring for this knowledge? Well, everything we're sharing here today, along with communications, studies, and mitigation works that RDK has conducted over the years, are part of the overall risk management to keeping the resident at Fairmont Hot Springs safe. We first start off in trying to understand the hazard. So asking how big are these hazards and how frequent do these events occur? Then we want to understand the risk associated with those hazards. So what can be impacted by the hazard and to what degree? If that risk is high enough, then we can consider different mitigation options, asking what can we do to reduce that risk? And then finally, depending on the community's risk tolerance and what could be cost effective, we can then implement those mitigation measures. For Cold Spring Creek, we have completed the first 3 stages of the risk management process and currently building the debris flow mitigation structure on the creek, as Justin had mentioned in the beginning of this engagement session. And for Fairmont Creek, there's an active project that will address and update the information on the hazard, risk, and potential mitigation options, including what already exists on the creek. And of course, in order to provide guidance, structure, and facilitate governance, we need to think about policy considerations. For the purpose of this hazard guidance project, the main question we're looking to answer is what interim policies can we consider to manage risk without prohibiting development in this area? And so with your feedback here today and working closely with RDK, we're hoping to develop more clarity on the direction and the next steps. The last thing I'd like to highlight before we get to the prompt questions for this topic is where you can access the latest information. You can go to engage.rdek.bc.ca/debris. And on this page, you'll be able to access various reference documents, including assessment reports that have been produced to date. And it also highlights the current ongoing projects, including the update to the Fairmont Creek Hazard and Risk Assessment and the Hazard Guidance Project. So this project where you can continue to engage with the project and provide any feedback you may have beyond today's session as well. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the prompt questions. And again, we have 2 for this part. And if you have any clarification questions, please type them into the general chat. And if you have any additional questions, we encourage you to type them into the Q&A feature, and we will address them during our Q&A session at the end. So give another 3 to 4 minutes, and yeah.
We still have a number of people entering their answers, so we have 1 minute remaining. Have 15 seconds left. So if you are still typing, and it'll be 10 more seconds or so here to get it wrapped up. And we'll turn things back to you, Jack.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lori. Okay, so the second question for this topic is, has your understanding of the hazard history changed after today's presentation? And how so, if that is the case? So we'll give another 3 to 5 minutes and we'll be right back.
And this is an example as well for those of you. I will be able to share the results because there is a yes/no component to the first part of this question. So I will share those at the end of this when we end the poll on this one. And we have just about 40 seconds remaining. And just while we're waiting for the last answers to be entered here, just a quick reminder, if you do have questions that you want to ask and have any of our speakers address at the end of the presentation, at the bottom of your screen, joining us on the computer, when you hover your mouse over, you'll see a number of little icons that pop up, and the one called Q&A is the one where you will want to answer those questions. And you just click on that button, and that's where you could ask questions that you would like to have addressed at the end of the presentation by the panel. And it does look like we've probably had enough time here for this question, so I'm just going to end the poll. And if the presenters can just bear with me for a moment, I'll just share the results. And if somebody can give me the thumbs up that you're able to see that on the screen, that it's just about 50-50 here between yes and no, perfect. And then you can see there that the text answers, they don't display the answers, they just show how many people answered. So that gets extrapolated when we export the report at the end of the session. So thanks to everyone for participating. We'll stop the screen share there and we'll turn things back over to you, Jack.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can everyone still see the screen that I'm sharing? Okay, fantastic. So yeah, thank you everyone for your participation. Now we'll move on to our third topic, and I'll actually pass it back to Brett to talk about risk tolerance.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. This is a pretty human topic. You might think of it as about, instead of talking about it as risk tolerance, with lots of numbers, you might say, what am I going to bother worrying about? What's important enough a threat to me that I'm going to worry about it? So let's go to the next slide. If you're like me, heart disease, you're going to worry about that. You're going to probably modify your eating habits. You're going to get exercise because lifetime odds of dying from heart disease is pretty high. It's what got both my grandparents on my dad's side and my grandparents, one of my grandparents on the other side. Another thing that you're going to worry about is motor vehicle crashes. Turns out you've got a 1 in 100 chance of dying in a motor vehicle crash if you live in the US, and that's averaged lifetime odds of death due to that. Drowning is a little less frequent, 1 in 1,000 lifetime odds. And then you go down, and you end up with the lifetime odds of being struck by lightning being 1 in 200,000. So we have different ways of approaching these different things, and as humans, we take different actions depending on our understanding of how frequently or how likely those hazards, those events are likely to impact us. So, we pay a lot of attention to regulating motor vehicles, speeds, safety, all of that sort of stuff. We pay a lot of attention to making sure that there are lifeguards on pool decks and that people in boats have life preservers. We regulate those things because the lifetime odds of those affecting human life, resulting in loss of life, are high, higher than we tolerate. That's the idea. So one of the key things here is figuring out what size of landslide, what are we going to worry about? Because really big ones happen, but they happen very infrequently. So let's go to the next slide. I want to talk about something that's related to this. And that's skydiving. Why? Well, because it's an event. You're pretty safe to go for one skydiving jump, right? If you go once, you've only got a 1 in 100,000 chance of dying. And quite a few people would say that that's an acceptable level of risk. They're willing to take that on for the benefit of jumping out of a plane. Those of us who don't want to jump out of a plane don't do it because we're worried about the risk, but because perhaps we wouldn't enjoy the experience more than because we don't, we think it's too dangerous. It just sounds terrifying to me, so I'm never going to do it. But some people jump out more than once. And that's an important thing when we start to think about annual chances, which we're going to do later. But just to look at how the math changes here, if you jump out of a plane going skydiving, you're the average jumper 10 times, then your likelihood, your odds of dying increases by about 10 times. Same thing if you jump out 100 times. By the time you hit the world record number of jumps set by Don Kellner, who jumped out, almost 50,000 times, if he were an average skydiver with average talents, his chance of dying in one of those dives is about 1 in 3. So the chances, as you are exposed to the hazard, go up higher and higher and higher. And that's kind of what we're facing with these hard to encounter, hard to understand events like debris flow. So if we go to the next slide, I've made this point already that mountains landscapes are kind of alive. This is a CGI picture that ChatGPT made for me, showing steep mountains that generate rock falls that then accumulate on the lower slopes that then move via various kinds of debris, floods and debris flows into large rivers. But to me, I see this picture and I realize the landscape is alive, and that particularly in the steep steep streams, you've got a whole range of different event sizes that occur. You get small events that happen relatively frequently. We saw a lot of those in the table that Jack presented. We get ones that occur less frequently that we'll call moderate, and ones that are very, very rare, but very, very large. And we have to ask ourselves, are those worth worrying about? Next slide, please. Let's think about a moderate debris flow. A moderate debris flow would be one that happens about as often as a debris flood. So like, maybe once in a 50-year period. Most of what we've seen in the Fairmont area or have documented doesn't even fall in this category. We're talking about ones that are bigger than most, ones that might happen a couple times in a century. And one of the things that we hear from the general public and think ourselves sometimes is well, it only happens once or twice in a century. What's the chance of that encountering my property, or me encountering that in my environment? Me seeing that sort of event? Well, in any 1 year, it's only 1 in 50. It's small. Good odds if you want to buy a lottery ticket, but small if you're worrying about hazards. However, if you live in an environment, same place, for 10 years, all of a sudden your odds are increased. Your odds of encountering one of those 50-year landslides is 1 in 5. You live there 25 years, it goes up to about 1 in 2.5. If you spend 50 years of your life in a place, you've got almost a 1 in 1 chance. So 1 in 1.6 chance of encountering that very rare event. Only once in your life, probably, but still your chances go up of encountering that, even though it's a relatively rare event. Now, I think most of us could probably wrap our heads around that, because we'll hear stories about these things from people that have been around, say 25 years, 50 years, and have that experience. So these are kind of like on the margins of what the human brain can appreciate and understand. We can listen to the stories of other people and use that experience to sort of calibrate ourselves. Next slide. That's really tough when we start to get into the ones that are most dangerous. So let's talk about the return period that Ministry of Transportation and Highways uses to determine fit for use or safe for use for their infrastructure. They design and think about a 1 in 500 year return period, or 1 chance in 500 of in any year of a landslide, debris flow, whatever occurring. So in year 1, you've got 1 in 500 chance of that occurring. If you hang around there long enough, if you stay in this location long enough, say 50 years, you've now got a 1 in 10 chance of encountering a debris flow of that size. So that's something that is like 10 times larger than the moderate, right? So this is what we mean by a large debris flow. That now becomes about the same chances of dying due to heart attack, right? So, if encountering one of these debris flows is likely to result in your death, you've now put large debris flows in the same category as heart attack as a likely cause of death. Now, that's not the case, because most of that encounter probability, the chance that debris flow will act on you, run over you, injure you, is not necessarily high. It depends on where the debris flow is, where you live, all of those sorts of things. So I'm not saying that these are the odds of death due to that debris flow. That's really what the hazard analysis, risk analysis, and policy development is all about, is trying to make sure that it doesn't get to something like that. But just your odds of actually being in an area when one of these occurs, or having one of those occurs in your home neighborhood, becomes quite big when you take the right view, that view of things over larger time periods. So that's the key idea that I wanted to sort of get across, is that when we talk about these probabilities and frequencies, we're talking about the probabilities of a landslide, the odds of a landslide occurring in any given year. And the odds of encountering it go up and up and up the longer you stay in a landscape. Okay, well, next slide, last concept that sort of sets us up to go forward. I've been using terms very informally here. And to make things make sense further on, we need to get a little bit technical here. So the first thing we start off with is hazard. A flood is a hazard. A lightning strike is a hazard. A debris flow is a hazard. A debris flood is a hazard. A hazard is a natural process. Lightning strikes aren't bad. They're only bad if they hit you, right? Debris flows aren't bad. They're only bad if they impact people and infrastructure. So that's what a hazard is. There's no judgment on it. It's just something that happens in the natural landscape. What it does brings it into the human realm. So does it damage infrastructure? Does it close off roads? Does it cause economic loss? Does it cause loss of life? That's what we call consequence. And when you consider both of those things, the chance that something is going to occur and the chance it's going to cause loss of life or damage, that's what risk is. So hazard times consequence equals risk. Risk is something that relates to either damage to human infrastructure or loss of life. Hazard is just something that happens that goes on out there, and it's only human proximity to that hazard that results in risk. And there's lots of ways that we can think about mediating that, but that's kind of where policy goes, where rules about hazard mapping, risk mapping go. So I think that's probably good for now. Let's go to our next poll question. So first question is, what is your current level of comfort knowing the risk of the hazard? So we'll bring up a poll there. And it's, yeah, this one should be a little bit quicker.
And for those of you who've just joined the meeting in the last little bit, you just need to answer the question with what your feelings are on the screen. And we'll probably give another 30 seconds or so. And then this one, because it is one that has choice, I'll be able to share the results immediately of this one as well. Got another 15 seconds or so. So if you have not yet answered and you'd like to take part in this one, just select the answer that best suits you. And we've got about 10 seconds left. Okay, and I'll just end the poll here and I will share the results. Just give me the thumbs up if you can see that on the screen there. Perfect. And we'll stop the screen share and head back to Brett for the next question.
Great. So this is, what does it take to make the risk acceptable? What are your thoughts on that? So let's launch that poll, and this will be another 3 or 4 minute one. So we'll see you in 3 or 4 minutes.
We have about 40 seconds left for this one. And 10 seconds to go here. We'll turn things back over to the team.
Great. Tamsin, I think you're up next for this next session.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brett. So thanks to Brett and Jack and to all of you for being here. I am Tamsin Mills, a planner, and I work at that intersection between planning and natural hazards. And just before I jump in, I wanted to mention that the question and answer period is coming up following this, and direct you that at the bottom of your screen along the menu bar, there's a button with a question mark and it says Q&A. And if you press on that, that's a great place to enter your questions for the Q&A. Okay, so let's talk about policy considerations. And really, I'm going to try and tie the great descriptions by Brett and Jack of hazard and risk to application at the property and safety level. So next slide, please. So before I jump into property level and safety level, just acknowledging that these debris flows and debris flood hazards can really affect many things we care about. And so we need to think about policies and practices across these realms as well. So not just private and public property, but also supply chain, critical infrastructure, and of course, the damage to the natural systems as well. And this is a picture from Cougar Creek and Canmore. Okay, next slide, please. And so bringing it down to the property level, we do have homes that can be exposed and vulnerable. And this is an example from California. So lots of damage there. Next slide, please. Okay, so I feel like we have gone over this a few times, but I'm going to do it again using this cartoon and really bring it down to the property level. So on the left here, we have the hazard. So in this case, it's not a debris flow. We're looking at sort of an atmospheric river and flood. And on the left here, there's some trees, some natural areas in the way. So that's what's going to get damaged. But then as we move to the right, when we look at figure 3, well, now we have a home and some people in the way. So they're exposed to this hazard. And this home is not flood-proofed. It's sitting right at grade. And these are 2 older adults. There's very little access, emergency access in and out here. And they have a canoe for transportation. So we could say there's also a lot of vulnerability here. So they're exposed to this hazard and there's vulnerability. So that makes for quite severe consequences as we move to the right and look at number 4 here. Now we have a very damaged property. There's going to be a lot of disruption to these 2 older adults while they have to build the new place right here. They're having issues with evacuation. So the consequences are quite severe. So when we put consequences and the probability of the hazard of a certain magnitude occurring, we get risk. And that's when we need to make good decisions and good policy interventions to build resilience. And you can see here, they've incorporated some resilience moves by moving the house way out. They've got a protective seawall, river wall in dike in the way as well. Next slide, please. So we have those 3 elements that contribute to risk: the hazard, the magnitude and probability of the hazard, the exposure. So what are the things we care about that are in the way and could be affected by this hazard? And the vulnerability or the susceptibility or sensitivity of those things we care about to this hazard. So some of the approaches to manage risk that are taken internationally are in these sort of categories. We have these 3 colored circles to work with. So what can we do? We can avoid creating new risk. So avoid putting things we care about in the hazard's way. And we can manage existing risk. And some of the levers there are to mitigate the hazard. So try to reduce that hazard. And, that's underway through construction of risk mitigation infrastructure on the creeks. We can reduce exposure. So we can think about that through land use. What kind of uses are we suggesting in those hazard areas? And we can reduce vulnerability. So how do we build and construct and design our homes in these hazard areas? And we can also undertake activities to increase our resilience. So by educating, building our own awareness, knowing the emergency response procedures and early warning systems. And of course, insurance has always been a tool to manage risk as well. Next slide, please, Jack. So what does that look like actually on the ground? Here are some examples. These are from Fraser Valley Regional District. So they do deal with flood more than debris flow, but just to suggest some of the examples that are taken in BC. We elevate buildings, we set them back, so we make sure there's lots of room for the hazard. We have monitoring devices, so early warning systems and evacuation procedures. And we can have raised reinforced foundations to protect against debris floods and debris flows as well. And that's just a few examples. Next slide, please, Jack. So just let's look at what's in place in policy already at the RDEK in terms of guidance on hazards. So these are from the Emergency Management Plan and the Official Community Plan. So you can see there's a focus on ensuring public safety by discouraging development in unsuitable areas. So that's avoiding creating new risk. And we also see the policy about minimizing the potential damage to property. So really ensuring that we look at mitigating the hazard and also reducing the vulnerability of buildings in the hazard area. Encourage infrastructure design to be more resilient. So of course, we're supported by all sorts of infrastructure like roads and sewer and water lines. So ensuring that those are also considered. And then that developments incorporate strategies to mitigate the impact of that hazard, as well as looking at emergency response. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are some of the general land use approaches for hazard areas in BC? So these are used commonly across BC to deal with hazards such as flood and debris flows, debris floods. So there are some long-term strategies for managed retreat from vulnerable areas where there's already existing development. There's often recommendations in land use designations for lower intensity land use where there's a high hazard. So thinking about recreation uses or agriculture uses that have fewer person hours in place compared to, say, residential, where you assume somebody could be there anytime, 24 hours. And then we see restrictions on increasing density, so significant requirements before there's sort of subdivision or rezoning to a higher density. So if we look on the right here, in terms of types of building and development, and the arrow showing how risk increases as we add more people and more value that could be exposed to that hazard and affected by it. So minor repair, if you're not adding to the footprint and you're not adding a dwelling unit, that's lower risk than, say, if you're going to rezone to add far more density in that area. Next slide, please. So just some more general approaches, requirements. So we have in our legislation on land use that we can ask for site-specific studies before issuing permits when there's a hazard in play. So often we ask for those assessments, and the recommendations come out about siting, form, elevation, orientation, lots of things that can be done at the property level to reduce that exposure and vulnerability. And another example, requirements for foundation design and build, and then there's covenants, which is a bit of a legal instrument where there's a clear acknowledgement of the risk. Next slide, please. This very colorful slide, I'm not going to go into all of these, just to say that there are many tools available at the regional and local government level to incorporate policies for hazards. So everything from official community plan down to the building permit level and throughout. And of course, we've got those site-specific studies by qualified professionals as well. And I think that's it. Is the next slide? Yes, so now we're going to move on to a few questions that relate more closely to property. Thanks. I see Laurie's put that up. So what would you like the region to consider when developing policy to reduce risk to property, buildings, and people? So not just property, but also personal safety.
And as this one will likely take a little bit longer for people to type the answer, we'll allow 4 minutes for this response. And I'll just kind of try to monitor things as we go here to see if that looks like it's enough time. We'll give 30 more seconds or so for this one. There are still answers coming in. We've actually got a couple more questions that have just come in just now. So I'm just going to give another 20 seconds or so, Tamsin, just because I would really hate to cut people off there.
Thanks, Laurie. That's
providing an answer here. So I'll just give it a few more seconds here just to make sure that we don't have any additional questions coming or answers, sorry, coming. Okay, it does look like we maybe have received the last answer that we're going to get, so I will end the poll there and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Lori. So the last question from us before we move to questions from you is, how do you currently today or anticipate, foresee keeping yourself and your property safe? And thanks again. We really appreciate everybody contributing to these answers.
And we will leave roughly the same amount of time for this question as we did for the last question. I know I can see that there are still many answers coming in here. And so just a reminder for those of you that may have questions that you would like to ask of the panel, Jack, Brett, Tamsin, or even Justin as well. If you do have a question, there is at the bottom of your screen a little bar with icons. And just about right in the middle, there's one that's got a question mark in a little comment box. And it says Q&A. That is the tool. If you do have questions to ask, we will be having them answered live here on this meeting. So if you fill in that little box, if you do have questions, we will be moving to those after this section of the presentation. We do have about 2 more minutes for the answers to this current question, which is, how do you currently or foresee keeping yourself and your property safe? So once again, we have about 2 minutes time on this one, and then we will turn things back over to the team and jump right into the questions and answers. And we'll give about 30 more seconds here on this one. Okay, I think we'll end the poll there. And we'll turn things back to the team. I didn't know if there were any sort of wrap-up comments that you'd like to make before we jump into the questions and answers, or if you would like us to just jump in. And I'll maybe look to Brett or Justin or Jack or Tamsin to give me some direction there.
Yeah.
I think we're just going to jump straight into the Q&A here. So
Okay.
thank you for watching the presentation portion of this. And yeah, I think that Tamsin, you were going to be leading or guiding us through that Q&A section here.
Absolutely, I can. So right now we have 2 questions on the board here. The first question from David: mitigation efforts seem to have focused on riprap installation to armor banks and catchment basins. Any thought to criteria of where the risk is significant? rainfall even greater than 20 millimeters for consecutive days, or snowpack greater than 120% combined with rainfall or some other criteria. So thinking about criteria, who can we direct this question to?
Hi, thanks. Yes, so I'll just take the lead on this at first. So the scope of this project and the hazard guidance project that we are talking about today is land use. So this question does go a little bit beyond the scope of the project that we are working on. But that being said, we do have Kara online, who is the project lead on the mitigation efforts that are going on in the Fairmont area, and I believe that she's prepared to speak to this as well. Carrie, you're online there?
Yes, I am. Just give me a minute and I'll turn my camera on.
I think she's showing up as my doppelganger there. So
Yeah, sorry. Uh, okay, great. So yeah, I guess the quick question, or the quick answer to the question is, yes, we've given lots of thought around criteria, particularly around precipitation events that would give us a higher likelihood of an event happening. Especially with rainfall intensity, and we closely monitor the weather and the snowpack, so we can be prepared if we see something like that coming in the near future. But we can't control the weather, and because of that, we look at what we can control, and that is containing material if it does come towards the community. So that's why we're responding with the physical infrastructure that we're building. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Kara and Justin. I'm moving to the next question from Ryan. To what extent have you included the local emergency services on this topic? So looking back to RDEK, have there been large-scale flood scenario practices with emergency services? And if not, can you start organizing such events?
So thank you. So again, a little bit outside of the scope of this project, but luckily enough, we do have Christina Carberry, who is on the attendee side, and I've asked just to provide a written response here that I can provide to the attendees. And what she has to say is that we haven't done a large-scale exercise specific to Fairmont with everyone, but that being said, that it is an integrated team that have all responded to debris flows and floods in Fairmont of varying size, and have had many discussions around what those evacuations look like, and any concerning conditions that do arise over time. They are familiar with the risks faced by the community and are well prepared to respond if and when something does happen. They do plan large-scale exercises every 7-ish years and do smaller table exercises annually. The hazards chosen for all of these rotate to cover the different hazards the region faces, and that's predominantly wildfire, flood, and dangerous goods spills.
And Justin, if I can just jump in there as well, I think another piece of this question that is really relevant is what the community can do to help themselves be best informed in the situation of an emergency. And so anyone within the Fairmont area that has not already signed up for the evacuation notification system, we strongly urge and encourage you to do so. And you can do that off of the links around the emergency information page on the RDEK's website. And I can also add those just as a follow-up to this meeting to both the Fairmont debris flow page and also to the Fairmont Hazard Guidance page. So a really important piece of emergency preparedness isn't just the teams that are responding, but also the community and taking advantage of all those tools. And up until now, I would say we have not had a super strong response from the community of Fairmont, and would really like to see those numbers improved.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Larry, as well. Okay. I'm gonna couple a few questions from Larry. So when will the Cold Spring retention be commissioned? So that would be to Kara or Jack, perhaps. And then Justin, I think more for you. Will the adjacent Cold Spring property owners receive a draft of the policy? I'm assuming this is policy, Larry, neighborhood guidelines. Will the property owners see them before they are sent to the board?
Okay, so I can answer the first question about about the cold spring structure. Construction is ongoing, and our contractor is doing everything they can to get as much done as possible this fall. Total completion won't be until the spring, but there will be some protection provided. Even at this point, there is protection being provided by the community to the community by what has been constructed.
Thanks, Kara. And then to Justin, will the policy be available in draft prior to going to the board?
Yes. So, yes, so to answer that question, absolutely. That it will be part of the process. Once we do receive the report back from BGC and PINA, one of the first steps there will be to get it out to the public and to receive feedback on that draft of policy direction. And so between the receipt of the report, the hazard guidance report from BGC and PINA, we will be developing we'll be using that to develop policies. So we're hoping that it provides pretty clear direction on a policy direction, and then, hopefully be able to relatively easily insert that into our existing policies or alongside our existing policies. But at each of those steps, we will be looking for public feedback and undertaking some community engagement to help refine out those plans and smooth out any edges that may need smoothing, as it were.
Thanks, Justin. Okay, there's a few questions here about the risk of debris flow in the East Kootenays in the last 100 years in comparison to risk of fire. So I think, Brett, you might have a few numbers on that.
Sure. Yeah, I have some numbers that speak to landslides and fatalities in British Columbia over about the last 100 years, just to give some context. On average, we're talking about something like 2.8 fatalities per year due to all types of landslides in British Columbia. The total number of fatalities that have been documented, we've had about 390 in relation to 123 fatal landslide events. And if we look at those, over 53% of those are due to debris floods or debris flows. So the majority, small majority, but the majority of debris flows of deaths due to landslides are coming as a result of the sorts of things that we're talking about here today. I can't narrow it down precisely to the Kootenays, but the coast and the Kootenays, Columbia's, Rocky Mountains, that's the area where these landslide hazards are concentrated. The interior plateaus, we don't see deaths. So they are locally concentrated, and that's a good point of view to keep in mind.
Thanks,
and then the question of how does the risk compare to fire? Well, they're overlapping risks, actually, because the primary driver of these debris flows are fires. Debris flows become far more frequent following a wildfire that affects a basin. And so what we're seeing, especially with the higher intensity fires that cause greater effect to greater changes to watershed surfaces and burn off more trees and create larger, completely unvegetated areas, is that one of the primary effects of wildfire is increased debris flow activity, both in the months and weeks following a wildfire, but then also again about a decade afterwards, when the effects on the roots structure of the trees starts to play a part. It takes a while for the tree roots to rot away, and it takes even longer for them to be replaced. So actually the minimum root strength, when you're thinking about those triggering events for debris flows, happens about a decade after a fire. So there's both the immediate term and the more sort of decade scale effects of wildfires on debris flows. So that's what I think is important to keep in mind. Wildfire and debris flows are quite strongly linked.
Thanks, Brett, for highlighting that link. Justin, a question about how the project is funded. What are the tax implications? I believe this project is 100% funded. Otherwise, can you speak to that, please?
Yes, that's correct. So this project is 100% funded through a UBCM grant. So there is no impact to the taxpayers of Fairmont for this project. And this is really looking at that land use. So there is no additional infrastructure coming as a direct result of this project. We really are looking at policies and policy direction work. So the only piece is some staff time of primarily myself and a little bit from some of the other attendees that we do have here today. But as I say, the otherwise, all of the fees for PINA and BGC are completely covered by that grant.
Thanks, Justin, for speaking to that. One question here from David, or maybe perhaps more of a comment, is just the connection to short-term rentals and other policies that affect density due to lack of housing opportunities. So that these additions to density through short-term rentals are important considerations when you think of the full picture of risk. And yes, Dave, I agree as a planner, and I'm sure Justin can contribute to that as well. But when we're thinking about risk, we're thinking about, the density of people, whether that's just through new builds or through additions to people in existing homes through renovation, short-term rentals, additional dwelling units, etc. Justin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think from the density side, that's definitely something that we can over time as we do develop both the policies specific to the mitigation efforts here, the risk efforts here, as well as short-term rental regulations moving forward. It's definitely something that we can consider in that broader scope, that if we are looking at short-term rental regulations, that there may be a desire to keep some of those numbers at a certain place depending on how that interacts with the risk that is present. So yeah, excellent point and duly noted.
So Dave is asking in real time, is there a direct link for such consideration? I'm not sure, David, if you mean, or sorry, Dave, if you mean, I'm not sure what you mean by direct link, but I can suggest that it's being considered in this project as well. We didn't talk about those other policies that are existing and ongoing that do change the landscape of risk, but they are considered in developing policy. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Maybe we'll give it a moment and wait see if there's any last minute questions.
Tamsin, I think Dave just provided a little clarity around what I think he was referring to with the link rather, and that's just the connection between the project team and others.
Project team and others. I'm still not getting it. Sorry. Justin, do you understand?
If I can infer, so this definitely is a bit of an iterative process as far as looking at the debris flow mitigation structure and some of the other work that is ongoing up in the Fairmont area generally. One piece that is a direct link is some of the hazard mapping. So as part of the mitigation structure process that we have going on up there, there is going to be a post-construction risk assessment. And this project will be, we've built it out in such a way that we can proceed with getting that policy direction and have that understanding of what policy direction might work well within the regional district and for the Fairmont community in anticipation of receiving and having those updated risk area and hazard area maps that will be able to integrate those together into a finalized policy. So in that way, yes, this is very much linked to other project teams, even though this is a very focused area of analysis and policy planning. It is absolutely related to the other projects, just not under the direct umbrella of those projects, if that differentiation makes sense.
Thanks, Justin. And sorry, Dave, that I wasn't getting that, but I understand now. And yes, we'll do our best to connect and get a full picture here. Okay, Colleen, any more questions? If you haven't found the Q&A button, you could put it in the meeting chat as well. Larry would like a more definitive completion date and wondering why that timeline is variable.
So for this project specifically, some of it does depend on the recommendations that do come out of the hazard guidance report that is provided. So depending on what the scope and scale of those recommendations are, we as staff will need time to develop the actual policy as it applies to the RDEK specific bylaws that exist, or if there is a need to create new bylaws or policies, that all takes time. And without understanding exactly what will be needed within that, it's difficult to pin down an exact date of implementation. Now, I'm thinking that the spending millions may be looking at the debris flow mitigation structure itself, and I might ask if Kara can maybe respond to that side of it.
Yeah, no problem. The construction contract for this project was just over $10 million. And in a project of that scale and complexity, and this is a fairly complex project, there's a lot of components to it. There are reasonable delays that happen within such a project that have put this a little bit behind. Not uncommon in a project of this size. Our focus is on getting it done as quickly as we can and on making sure that the product that we receive is the product that we want.
Thank you, Kara. Okay, I think that wraps up the question and answer period. I think okay. I'm seeing another question here. How will the mitigation infrastructure work impact the risk? I think the risk sort of that Brett's presented in this session. And is this why we are working on the development policies now? So a bit of how the mitigative structure is connected to risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's depending on how you approach the management of it, absolutely. When you mitigate the hazard, you reduce the area that's affected by the hazard, and so the area impacted by the policies changes. That's maybe a simple way of thinking of it. I like to think of it as a polygon on a map, as a zone on a map, that if you don't mitigate, the area where you need to apply certain controls is large, and as you mitigate that and reduce the hazard, then that area shrinks back. And I think in very simplistic terms, that's the best way to think about the relationship between mitigation and risk.
Yeah, and I think, thinking back to that colorful slide where you sort of have your hazard, your exposure, and your vulnerability, and we try to work with all three of those so that infrastructure really helps on the hazard side, reducing or mitigating the hazard. But we can never completely remove risk. There will always be residual risk, and it's important to look at those two other sides of the circle as well, exposure and vulnerability. And those are often dealt with through land use and building development regulation. Okay, I'm going to give 30 more seconds for any last minute questions. These are great questions. John, I see a question. What is the project under discussion? I think there are a few projects that have been discussed during the session. I think the focus of the session has been on hazard guidance, the Hazard Guidance Project, which is looking to develop recommendations on policy. But we've also discussed the project that's underway constructing hazard mitigation infrastructure. There's a hand up. Larry, do we have the opportunity to unmute here? A participant?
I'm trying to get it unmuted, but it's not unmuting. It's John that just
Right.
asked that question. I'm not sure, John, if you're able to ask the question or if you've got access to the microphone, but I know John does have access to the chat because they asked the question in the chat. So it looks like the audio feed is not working. So I don't know if the hand was up before the question was answered, but for
Okay.
anyone that is joining that wants information or has more questions about the Cold Spring Creek debris flow mitigation project or the Fairmont Creek Hazard and Risk Vulnerability Project, I think those are separate projects from the project that's being discussed today. And we do have a project page for each of those with contact information. Kara is the team lead on both of those projects and is available to answer questions. If you haven't signed up for the Fairmont email group, project updates are also sent out that way on this project. And they're also listed on the project page. So those are other ways to get information on those two projects. And I don't think John is able to, we can't hear John. So I'm hoping that we've answered his question. If not, I certainly encourage John to reach out to this team and we'll make sure that the questions get addressed directly. But that's sort of the update from this side. And I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or the chat. So I think I'll just turn things over to Justin for some concluding remarks.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Tamsin, for running us through the Q&A there. Yeah, so thank you for everyone for joining today. As Larry just mentioned, we do have the engagement page that is live, and we will be adding all of the questions that were asked of participants today to that project page. So if you did want to jump on and you had a more detailed response for any of them, or if any new ideas come to mind for any of those questions, please do feel free to go to the engagement page and add any comments that you may have. A recording of this presentation will also be available there. So if you have any community members, family members, or otherwise that may be interested in this topic and may be interested in providing feedback, please do direct them that way. And then, of course, myself, here at the Regional District of East Kootenay can be contacted at jcook@rdek.bc.ca. And I am the project lead on this. So as it progresses, if you have any comments or concerns or questions or otherwise, please feel free to reach out and ask those. But with that, I think that we are at the end of today. So thank you again for everyone for coming out and participating, and to our presenters, RDEK staff, Director Klovetruk, and Director Schneider for being on the call today. And yes, thank you for everyone for joining, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Look forward to the process.